On episode 224 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we speak to expert Carolyn Butler-Madden, and she's going to tell you how you can develop a social purpose for your organization and how that is going to make it skyrocket. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about social purpose today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome one, welcome all. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and it's so great to have you here for yet another episode of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. Today, we are going down a route that we've never been on the show, and that is talking about social purpose. And if you don't know what social purpose is, it's basically taking some kind of purpose that helps society get better and putting that behind basically the reason for your company, your business, your organization. We're starting to see social purpose more and more in the world and organizations getting behind it, but yet it still goes with some criticism and backlash because there are some people out there who say businesses can't get into basically politics. That's what it's viewed as. Now, I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, as the world is changing, as the workforce is changing, as the people who we lead change, so must our organizations. And that's what we are talking about today. In fact, I brought on expert Carolyn Butler-Madden to discuss just this topic. And we go into what it is and how it relates to organization, what the Ediman Trust Barometer is, and why businesses need social purpose in the first place, why trust is so crucial in business, and how to develop an organizational identity, amongst many other topics. Carolyn is inspired by a future where business is a force for good and brands drive profit through purpose. And you're going to hear this theme over and over again. In fact, she brings out a number of examples to help you with understanding what that is. Carolyn is an author. She's got a number of books. Her first one, Path to Purpose, was Australia's first on cause marketing. And she's got a 30-year international marketing career, which includes 18 years of being an agency owner. So she understands marketing, leadership as being a former business owner, as well as the need for social purpose in your organization. Now, I'm sure you're listening to this show and maybe you're like, oh, Scott, I'm a middle leader. Guess what? We got you covered. Oh, Scott, I'm a brand new leader. We got you covered. Oh, Scott, I'm a small business owner. Guess what? We got you covered. This topic is not for big corporate businesses only, but for everyone that leads. So that's it for today. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation all about developing a social purpose in your organization with Carolyn Butler-Madden. Carolyn, welcome to the show. So good to have you here today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Scott. I'm really pleased to be here.
So we're kind of diving into your book, For Love and for Money, which is kind of revolve around that social responsibility for organizations out there, mainly businesses, to really grab a cause and go after it type thing. So before we really get into nuts and bolts of it, though, can you just explain to the listener out there, when we talk about social responsibility, what is it that we're talking about for them, so they have a baseline understanding?
Yeah, sure. And instead of calling it social responsibility, I call it social purpose because I think there's a big difference. Um, Social responsibility or corporate social responsibility is all about giving back, right? It's like, it was a recognition by business that, there was a cost of doing business and there was negative impact. So it's balancing the books.
You
Whereas,
got my MBA
um,
coming out of me here.
yeah, and but social purpose is about serving to create meaningful positive change in society through your business, through and beyond your business, your products and services. So it's a little bit different, and there's a really beautiful framing that someone gave it, which is corporate social responsibility is less bad, and in the world we live in today, that just doesn't cut it. What we need are responsible social corporations, and that's where social purpose comes in.
So can you go a little bit deeper? That social, the corporation bit you just said there at the end. Like, what do you mean by
Responsible
that?
social corporations.
Yeah, yeah. There we go.
Yeah, yeah, no, happy to. So what I mean by that is business. If you think about business over the last 40, 50 years, business is there to create profit. And when business creates profit, everything else will flow from it. You'll be able to employ people, we'll be able to look after them, look after communities, give back, do all this stuff. And, that was the basic theory of trickle down economics and Milton Friedman's shareholder capitalism model, right? Which we've all followed. But, take a look around and look where it's got us. There's nothing wrong with capitalism. Capitalism is incredible. But shareholder capitalism, this focus purely on profit, is the sole responsibility of business, has led us to a place where, the negative impacts are so visible for us all to see, not just in climate change, not just in environment and biodiversity, but in the increasing inequality between nations and also between people within nations, the wealth gap, and all the issues that come from that, and a whole stack of issues beyond that as well. So, when I talk about responsible social corporations, what I mean there is this idea that business should serve society's needs. In fact, the economy should service society's needs. We're not there. We shouldn't be there to serve the economy just for the economy's sake. The economy should be serving society's needs. Business needs to serve society's needs. Business needs to be profitable. It has to be profitable if it's going to serve society's needs in any meaningful way. But this idea of business just being about profit, we've just got to leave it behind. You know, um, there is a very, very clear expectation from people. There's a ton of research to support this, that right now, societal change is now a core expectation of business. Business is still catching up with society's expectations, and that's being driven by employees, it's being driven by consumers, and it's being driven by investors, both private investors and institutional investors. So, responsible social corporations, or business with a social purpose, means that business needs to serve all of its stakeholders. It cannot just be focused on profit. It's got to serve the needs of its own people, its employees, its customers, the communities it operates in, and the environment, and of course, their investors as well.
Now, one could argue that the reason that businesses exist in the first place is to help people and help society. You know, the tenet of business: find a hole, fill the hole with the product, good, service, whatever, and life is supposed to be good. But you're arguing that, you know, even more, even beyond that, from, you know, with your book and everything you just said. So,
Yeah, yeah,
how,
absolutely. And you know, I feel like if you go back to pre-Milton Friedman days, you know, business initially, as you say, Scott, it was there to serve. It was there to serve needs in society. And I'll use the example of Unilever. So Unilever, one of the world's biggest packaged goods companies, they are a purposeful business. They have a really strong purpose, which is a social purpose. And they've been on this path for a good 12 years, okay? So their purpose is to make sustainable living commonplace. Think about that for a moment, okay? They're a packaged goods company. They produce a ton of plastic. Think of all their household products. So they've got products like, you know, Dove and Ben and Jerry's and Axe or Lynx, depending on which part of the world you're in, and Omo, you know, just the big brands in the supermarkets, okay? And yet their purpose is to make sustainable living commonplace. So the very issues that they contribute to, they're actually looking to solve, to regenerate, if you like. And if you go back to the founder of Unilever, Sir William Lever, Unilever started with Sunlight soap way back. Can't remember the date it started, but it started with a purpose, and that was about helping people with their hygiene. Okay, so that's a very clear purpose, and that's filling a need. But where business has just gone over the last 40, 50 years is this single-minded focus on profit, which has led many leaders to make decisions that, you know, are very questionable ethically. And, you know, they've had supposedly a license to do that because that's what everyone believes business should be about, or that's been what everyone thinks business should be about. And then, of course, they balance the books by corporate social responsibility. But now the market is speaking, and now, you know, people are saying, no, if you look at do you know the Ediman Trust Barometer?
actually, no, I don't. Please educate
Okay,
me.
so Ediman are a global communications, PR and communications firm, and they have been researching trust for the last 20 years. So they are, you could call them experts on trust, right? They've got a lot of credible data on trust, and trust within our major institutions, so government, business, NGOs, and media. And the last few years, there's been a huge decline in trust across all of those institutions. And when COVID hit, it varied a little bit around the world, but generally there was a spike in trust. So, you know, with the initial response to COVID in some parts of the world, there was more trust. So here in Australia, for example, it went up. But now it's gone right down again. Every institution falls below the trust line, so falls into distrusted territory, except business. And then it drills down deeper into business. And it's not just business generally, like the big corporates, it's my employer. So trust is local, okay? And people are looking, so basically, people have lost trust in governments. They have realized that governments alone can no longer solve the big problems that society has. and they're looking to business to lead the solutions and lead the change. And it reflects a recognition that business has the capability, it's got the means, it's got the scale, it's got the resources, it's got the ability to create innovative solutions. So there's a recognition in the market that business can lead this change, and it has to collaborate with all the other institutions in order to do that. So the focus is now on business to do that, and we're seeing right around the world businesses like Unilever and many other businesses who are recognizing not just their responsibility to change, but the opportunity within that. So those that are leading the change are attracting, passionate and fiercely loyal employees who, because they're inspired by the change the organization wants to make, like they're bringing their best game to business, right? Like, because they feel like they're doing something meaningful. And then, you've got their loyalty as well. So they stay longer. You've got customers who love, it goes to the title in my book, Love. They love what that brand stands for and what they're doing. And they tell their friends about it and they tell their family about it. And increasingly, they're prepared to pay more for brands that are doing good and enabling them as their consumers or customers to do good as well. And they're less likely to switch away from those brands, when someone comes along and just drops a price, for example. So price is not the thing that drives the market in that case. And investors, ESG, environmental social governance, is becoming a critical issue for investment companies. And it's no longer enough to just look at the profitability of a business. They're looking at risk in business, right? And ESG is something that actually helps them navigate that risk. So yeah, basically those are the stakeholders who are going, no, business has to step up, and we will reward those businesses and brands that do it, and we want to be part of the movements of change that they create.
Wow, there's so many great nuggets in there. So hard to reflect. Actually, so a while ago, I actually mentioned that businesses do need to, look for a different purpose other than profits and go after it because of the reasons that you said. The generation entering the workforce don't, I shouldn't say don't care about money per se, but what they're more passionate about is finding that purpose and looking to make the change. And that was the reason, the rationale behind my statement. And I'll give you a few examples of personal things of that you along the lines of what you talked about. We were willing to pay more for other brands, or we're willing to do things, right? So as we discussed before I record, I'm a Canadian, and my wife and I will seek Canadian products first, depending on the situation. We're more likely to buy something Canadian. If there's two products sitting side by side, identical, and one was made in Canada and the other one was not, and the Canadian one is a bit more, we are more likely to buy the Canadian one because we're supporting local. That's important to us. So there's that, right? But it goes in line with what you're talking about, the purpose behind the organization. Now, on the negative side of that, a while ago, I don't know if it happened in Australia, but you probably heard about the whole Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal some years ago. Well, guess who owned a Dieselgate car? My wife did, not me.
Yeah, right.
But it was obvious through that whole ordeal to me, they were trying, Vice doing the right thing, they were trying to minimize the financial impact to the corporation. That's what they were doing. So when you looked at, when you look at all the buyback package that I got, I was extremely upset with it from the Canadian perspective. I thought the American one was relatively fair, but the Canadian one, I was extremely upset. And the reason I was upset with, I thought the there was multiple aspects to that buyback, and quickly. So we got black book value of the vehicle just prior to the announcement, which to me was fair. I'm like, that makes sense. Okay, cool. The problem I had was that they paid a restitution fee to the owners, i.e., sorry for being our accomplices in our crime. However, that's how I say it, right? They just say it's a restitution payment, right? However, what they did was the newer cars got more, i.e., there were less of them sold, and the older cars got less because there were more of them sold. But if you think about the purpose of that payment, it was to say sorry for making you accomplice in a crime. I'm the one with the oldest vehicle driving it the longest, yet you're giving me the least amount of money.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all, does it?
It's completely inverse. But if you logically think about it, and if you go ahead and look up the numbers, because I actually did look up production numbers and sales figures, there were more 20. We had a 2015. I can't remember now. 2010. We had a 2010. Yeah, because my wife bought a brand new 2010. So we had a 2010, which was the first year for that model when they did this scandal, and it was 2015 when they got busted. So if you look at the production numbers, it was generally 2010s were higher because it was a new model, blah, 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 a lot of hype around it. And they petered off 2015. By the time the scandal broke, obviously sales ceased on the vehicle.
Yeah.
So do you think I'll ever step into a Volkswagen dealership again?
Exactly. And what does it go back to, Scott? It's trust.
Yeah.
And trust is the currency of business today. It's always been the currency of business, but never more so than today when there is so much mistrust going on. You know, the more trusted a business is, you will see the correlation on how successful they are. And it's really interesting to see play out. So we literally, it's been in the news in the last 2 days here in Australia, the energy crisis, right? And the media are telling us it's about to hit consumer prices because of the energy wholesale market. And there is an energy, I don't know if they're a reseller or anyway, they're an energy provider. And they have literally done their risk assessment and they are telling their customers, you better leave us. Like, this is unheard of, right? But they have realized that the prices are going to spiral so much that the backlash on their brand is going to be just, a death wish for them. So I have no idea what they're going to do with their business, but I've never heard of anything like it. And I guess they realize that they just cannot afford to let their customers cop it and deal with trust backlash. So,
that's super interesting. I've never heard of that neither. Well, cojones to say such a thing, but maybe, along the thread of trust, maybe what they're after is, maybe they are working on the transition plan in the background that that you're not aware of. And what they're probably hoping is if we build keep our trust, our customers' trust now, they may not be our customer, but they still trust our brand. And then when we come back, version 2.0 or whatever, and say, hey, this is what we're doing now, maybe they'll come back to us, or at least a significant portion of them. Interesting.
I reckon you're absolutely right. And that's it. It's trust. And every business, small, medium, or large, has to ask the question, how am I building trust with my employees? How am I building trust? Because it starts from the inside out, right? How am I building trust with my customers? How am I building trust with my partners and collaborators and my investors? And how strong is that trust? Because it is the currency for success. And the more we're living in volatile times, and the more things happen like this, an energy crisis, the more we start to see who these organizations really are and what matters to them. And, it goes to something I talk about a lot is your organizational identity. It's who you are. Everyone talks about purpose as your why, but your why becomes even deeper when you start thinking about who you are, what your organizational identity is, how, what matters to you, what is your worldview, and how do you respond at moments like VW Dieselgate? How do you respond at moments like an energy crisis? How do you respond when you have bushfires and floods and stuff like that? And ultimately, what are you doing to serve society's needs? Because there are huge needs that need to be solved. So what are you doing? Or are you just sitting on your hands and selling as much bleep as you can to make as much money as possible?
No, yeah, absolutely agree with you. Now, for the leaders out there that are listening, wow, that makes a lot of sense. We don't really have a social purpose. We are definitely that business that's in it for the money. We're here to make money. Sure, we got a great product, we got a great service, but we don't have a social purpose right now. How can they go about establishing, developing one, figuring out what it should be? Because as you've kind of highlighted through the book, there's usually a bit of a tie between what the business offers and what their purpose is, right? For example, you talk about Patagonia a lot. Patagonia is a very massive outdoorsy retailer, but they're very involved in saving the planet, greener technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that connection there. So for the leaders out there, how can they go about trying to figure this out and then going to implement that change where they're actually going to go and take a social purpose and go after it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you've highlighted, Scott, the closer that your social purpose is to what you already do, the more meaningful it's going to be, the more credible it's going to be, and the more impact you'll be able to create. So Patagonia, as you mentioned, they're an outdoor apparel company, right? And their purpose is it's all around the environment. It's to save our home planet, in simple terms. And everything they do is about that. It's, yes, they sell things, but they look at selling the best. They use the kind of material that has the least impact on the environment. They look at different ways. They went into food. An apparel company launched Patagonia Provisions, a food company, because they asked the question, if we're serious about saving our home planet, we need to show that food production can be done sustainably and profitably. So, now you can get that. Unilever, who I mentioned before, big packaged goods company, their purpose is to make sustainable living commonplace. So they've marked it out right in the center of the greatest damage that they do. And, they have driven massive innovation through that purpose and by having brands with purpose as well. So how do you go about it? I'll share with you a simple framework that I use as part of the starting point of doing it when I work with my clients. But before I share that framework, there is an exercise that I think is really important, and I talked about before, starting with who. And that is it. It's really starting to think about your identity and who you are. And when I say you, I mean you as the business, you as the people within the business, as the leaders of the business, you as in your best customers of the business, you as in your investors in the business. So thinking about the best of you, actually thinking about, so if you're a large or a medium or large size organization, start thinking about the people who represent the very best of you as employees, as leaders, as customers, as investors. Think about who they are. Think about what their needs are that the business serves, but then go beyond that and start thinking about their desires, their deeper desires as people, right? As human beings, and then think about their narrative, their worldview, their beliefs, and what is that shared narrative of the company, not around your products and services, but around things that really matter to them, that your products and services might be able to impact. Okay, so Patagonia's shared narrative are people who love the natural environment. They're your surfers, your hikers, the people who love to get out into the great outdoors and enjoy it. And their shared narrative is a love of their natural environment. Okay, and once you know that, that's when you can go into a purpose that is probably far deeper than what you would normally do. So there's that bit. And then the simple framework I talked about is, if you imagine a Venn diagram, 3 circles. The first circle is what you do, okay? And you just populate that with all the things you do, your products, your services, all that stuff. The second circle is what the world needs, okay? And you populate that. And obviously, the closer you get to the intersection between what you do and the world needs is where you start to see opportunity forming and your sweet spot. And normally you can start to get into your purpose territory there. The third overlapping circle is what cause you can serve. And those 3 overlapping circles and the intersection between there is where you can start identifying what your social purpose is.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense, especially if you think about what we've been talking about, when you talk about, the first 2 circles, that is business right there. What you got and what the world needs, boom, that's business. But then when you take that third circle and drop it on top, like, okay, this is now, business 2.0. Welcome to the new world. Welcome to the new world, right?
Yeah, and that's it. It's a paradigm shift, isn't it? There's a huge paradigm shift that's happening right now, 2.0.
No, for sure. Absolutely. And it's all kinds of different scales. So we talked about like some massive companies. We mentioned Patagonia, you mentioned Unilever, but you also got examples of like super small businesses. I really like the one about Dave's Killer Bread. I thought it was amazing. I was like, and I'll let you share it, the story and the purpose behind it. But it shows that even the smallest business, for the small business owners out there who are listening to this show, you can have a social purpose as well. So I'll allow you to talk about Dave and his bread.
Absolutely. And look, for small to medium businesses as well, because you're more agile, you can get there quicker and you can build up credibility quicker, because purpose is nothing without the actions that serve it, right? That the purpose inspires. So Dave's Killer Bread, I'm glad you asked me that one. I love that story. So Dave Dahl is lived in the Midwest of the US, was brought up there, and long story short, he went off the rails as a teenager. He got in with a bad crowd. His parents ran a bakery in Portland, Oregon, and he got in with a bad crowd and started drinking, started taking drugs, led to armed robbery. He ended up in the prison system several times, 4 times. And then on the 4th time, he had a long stint in prison, and he went through a program. And that program, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it included design thinking. And also, as part of his rehabilitation, he discovered that he had depression, or he was bipolar. I can't remember, but he got onto medication. Anyway, when he came out of prison, his brother decided to give him a second chance in the family business, in the bakery. Truth be told, it was probably not second chance. It was probably more like the 4th or 5th chance or something like that. But he brought him back into the family business, and Dave started working eventually on an innovation product. And he started applying his design thinking principles to this innovation product. And he created this incredibly beautiful organic bread, which they launched at Portland Market. And this bread took off, right? Apparently, it's a huge thing to have a stall at Portland Market, and it absolutely took off. And people came to the stall, and he told his story, and he told the story of his second chance. Anyway, long story short, this bread just completely took off. They rebranded it as Dave's Killer Bread to reflect the killer taste of the bread, but also a recognition that it was, it came about as a result of Dave's story. And they printed a short form version of the story on the loaf packaging. And yeah, it just completely took off. And what they recognized was that Dave was lucky enough to have a family who gave him a second chance. And yet there were many people in the prison system who don't have that second chance. And, the likelihood of repeat offending for them is huge, huge recidivism rates in the US. And so they decided that they would make their employees open the door to having people who had a criminal record. And their view was, we're going to take the best person regardless of their background. And so they had at least a third of their employees were people with a criminal background. And I don't know if it's still the case, but you could go to their website and actually click on their employees and read their story and read what happened to them. And as Dave told me, I interviewed him, and he said, when you get someone from that background, they are so grateful and they are so determined to make good on their chance that they'll give you everything, right? So this business grew. It became the number one organic bread in the US. And the other part of it is they created the Second Chance Foundation, where they actually educated other businesses on how they could support second chance employment as well. So their purpose is all around second chance employment. And the business was eventually sold to Flower Foods for $275 million US dollars. And that is a brand with a really clear purpose. And, that is strong, that strongly, powerfully differentiates them from every other bakery product that's there.
That's such a great example. I absolutely love that story. It's
Yeah, me too.
It's phenomenal. The last thing I kind of like to dive into is, we hit the big companies, we hit the small companies. We talked about leaders establishing social purpose within their organizations, but there's also a lot of middle managers who listen to the show, and the life of the middle manager, you're stuck in the middle, and they may see this need and they see the shift incoming. What's your recommendations to them, and how can they start pushing these ideas upwards in order to get their business, their company or organization looking at this going, yes, we need to take this seriously. We need to do something about it.
That's a brilliant question, because I think it's a question that so many people face. I think there are a lot of people in that mid-level who their narrative really gravitates towards this, and they see the opportunity and they want to do something about it. But how? Where do I go? And I think what you have to do is you have to start talking about it. So I'll go back to that start with who and that organizational identity. There is a pretty good chance that within your organization, there are other people who feel the same way you do. Maybe they don't have as much information about it, but they've got that same desire to want to create change. So I think it's about seeking them out, within your direct network, but also beyond. Have conversations. And then particularly if you can engage with someone at leadership level, I think it's really important to do that and to open up conversations. And I think there are ways you can do that as well. Apart from my book, and obviously I'm going to plug my book, but there are actually a whole stack of books that have come out on this subject at the same time. And whilst we share different stories and different lenses, it is really consistent. And my suggestion is get your hands on one of these books or several of them. And if you can find someone who's open to your message, share it with them and open up a dialogue. So, my book is for love and money, but there's Good is the New Cool, The Principles of Purpose by Afdal Aziz and Bobby Jones. There is Net Positive by Paul Polman and Andrew Winston, which is the big corporate, that's the Unilever story. And that's amazing. And there is, I'm reading it at the moment, another book from the US, Lead with We by Simon Mannering. And there are a few other books, but if you can get one of those books into someone's hand, someone who has influence, who can create this change, or invite someone to come and speak. I do a lot of speaking, remotely and live with clients, but there are other people like me around the world as well who do that. And just, look at the resources around. Share podcast interviews of, this podcast interview is a good starting point potentially. So yeah, but I guess my best advice is start the conversation. I had one example of a medium-sized organization who were bought by a big organization who started their purpose journey because of a marketing executive. When I talk about exec, I'm talking about the most junior rung of the level, the most junior role in the marketing team. She started doing something and it led to them actually adopting a business purpose, and they are now looked at within this big parent company as a business that is leading the way. It started with a junior.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's a great example. Carolyn, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Before we wrap up, I do got a couple last questions for you. The first being a question I asked all the guests here on the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, and that is, according to you, Carolyn, what makes a great leader?
I think the greatest leaders look to unleash the superpowers of their own people. And I spoke to someone recently. I interviewed the CEO of Unilever, Australia and New Zealand, and she actually said, my number one job is to unleash the superpowers of my people. And to me, it's like, yeah, that, because your superpowers actually allow you to serve that purpose. So to unlock the superpowers, but also to show the vision of what you can achieve.
That's awesome. I love it. And finally, how can people find you? How can they follow you? Shameless plug time. It's all about you now.
Thank you. Look, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm the only Carolyn Butler-Madden on LinkedIn, so I'm very easy to find and I'm pretty active there. But you can also go to my website, thecauseeffect.com.au, and you'll be able to get in contact with me directly there.
Perfect. And for you, the listener, it's easy as always. Just go to leaddon'tboss/224 and links are in the show notes. Carolyn, again, thanks for coming out and taking time in your busy schedule to talk to us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. I've really enjoyed it.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. and that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that, help me, help a friend, win-win all around, and hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.